thanks everybody for coming on board. There's been a few of these kind of conversations. Claire has done a couple. I think one of them was obviously with Steph, who's online here. The last one was with David Smith. But I thought it would be a good thing to do this with Will, because Will's the newest member of the World Class Programme, and there's kind of therefore the most recent person to come through a development system of coming through a kind of a plan of activities that take him from home country through a transition and into the World Class Programme. And there will be, I guess, coaches working with players and players who are aspirational to make that same journey that Will has. And I'll just also add that this probably takes Will some degree out of his comfort zone. He's a man of few words, so I'll try and eke a few extra ones out today. Will, do you just want to introduce yourself, just so everybody? I mean, I guess everybody knows who you are, but just to let people know who you are and why you think you're here.
So like Glynn said, I just recently come on the programme. It was November, I want to say, last November. And it's sort of been I was there or thereabouts for a little while, but a few different factors kind of stopped me getting on the programme initially. I've played one international competition as part of Boccia UK, which was a silver medal in the Zagreb Regional Open. Obviously, since then, there have been pretty much no competitions. I was due to go to Zagreb again in 2020, and we were about 10 days out, I think, before we were meant to go, before it all got cancelled. I'm quite inexperienced from that front, but I think I have a good understanding of how sort of the program works and how sort of people go up through the ladder. So I think I can add a bit of value for people to understand how to go through that program, what maybe my challenges were.
Yeah, and I think hopefully we'll get through some of those and some of the factors that you think maybe stopped you getting on earlier. And obviously it's probably COVID more than anything else that stopped an obvious progression. And obviously you joined in a kind of restricted lockdown period, but you were on a trajectory to do that anyway. And I think with this year hopefully being such a big year with both Paralympic Games and European Championships, albeit no other competitions, I think you being on the World Class Programme was really important. So you're the newest member of the World Class Programme. So now the door is open to you. So let's start with a fairly big question. Rather than look back, let's look forward. What are the ambitions that you have for Will Arnott, Boccia player? What is it that you want to achieve and think you can achieve?
Yeah, so I think especially in the BC3 category for Boccia UK, it's a very strong position, and I think all of us on our day can beat anyone. And I think sort of going into, obviously there's the Europeans at the end of this year, where I want to be challenging for the medals and win the whole thing is obviously the hope, but obviously there are other factors that go into that can make that a very difficult task, and everyone knows that it's a difficult thing to do. I mean, on Jamie's run in 2017 when he won the Europeans, he had a fair few issues and went 6-0 down in the first end of that, so I'm aware that it's a very difficult competition, and the standard in Europe maybe not as high as in Asia, but the depth of it is definitely a bit larger here, and there's a lot of very solid players. And then I would say obviously the World Championships next year, so the Europeans and such are a way to qualify into that. And I think sort of I want to get a better understanding coming up of how to qualify for those events and what sort of, because I've never been involved in it like that. I've pretty much come into the program at a time when the places we'd already pretty much got the Tokyo places. So it's kind of like the job had almost been done from that point of view.
Okay, I'll just say, I mean, the job's almost been done. Selection is something that we can't talk about. We're in the midst of our selection process, and certain decisions have been made, but not confirmed. So it's a very long and detailed process, and whoever has made the BC3 team for the Paralympics is not in the public domain yet, and probably isn't likely to be for another week or so. So we'll have no questions on who's going to the games at this point. But I think you make a really good point that there's Connor joining us. That's good. You make a really good point about the strength of the BC3s in the UK. Now, obviously, in the world-class program, we have Beth and we have Jamie and Scott and Paddy and you. We have those 5 players, but there are also people not far off that as well. And I guess before you came along, there were other people who were desperately trying to break into that kind of group. So you kind of almost have to be capable of being a world beater just to get into the squad, and that's actually the case across the board. It's just we don't quite have the depth across the board at this point that we do in BC3. But hopefully, as we go through the next cycle, we'll get to that. So you're very clear straight away. You want to be winning championship medals, and that's kind of what's driving you. And I think it's quite refreshing for somebody to come out and say it, because ultimately that's the business that we're in, which is trying to win certainly Paralympic and global medals. And from my perspective as a coach, the reason you're on the program, the reason you got onto the program, was because you're capable of winning those medals. And if you're not, you don't get on the program. And I think it's as simple as that. I think it's a reasonable point for everybody to understand that we're never looking for just the best in Britain. I think in BC3 case, the best in Britain also is by default one of the best in the world. But we have to be looking at that those sort of global medal winners. So it's kind of refreshing to hear you say that, and that you're not talking about winning British championships. You're talking about winning world and European medals. Obviously, we've got everybody on the call knows Boccia. Tell us a little bit about the BC3 classification, and tell us a little bit about, because you played as a thrower, right, before you became a BC3. So actually, let's go back even further. Tell us about how you came to play boccia in the first place. What was your route into this sport? Because the pathways are never a straight line. It's a fairly sort of jaggedy, zigzaggy kind of line, and people coming from all sorts of places. So tell us how you found this sport of ours.
Yeah, so I would have played it for the first time in a very different setting, obviously, to where I am now. And it was sort of I would have been in year 5 or year 6 of primary school. And we went to an event called the Kennet Games, and it was boccia was one of the sports that we did, and it was very different in that everyone would be sat in a circle, and it would just whoever it was just alternate throws, and it would just go all the way around. And then I didn't really play it properly again for a couple of years after that. And then when I moved to Trelaws, which I know there's a lot of people who have learnt the game through Trelaws, and obviously Angmering as well, are 2 of the schools that encourage participation in boccia specifically, I think. And yeah, I met Barry, who at the time I'm not really sure where he was involved in. I just knew that he was involved with the team in Beijing in 2008, and obviously at that point I looked up to him very much because of the fact that he'd been to the Paralympics, and the Paralympics was still a very new thing to me at that point. Like I wasn't really sure what it was. And obviously, the run into 2012 gave me a much better understanding of what that was like. So I was at that point, I was a BC4, had a couple of different throwing techniques that were interesting. Very interesting underarm throw, which I found very difficult. It was quite challenging to be accurate with. And my sort of best achievement in that time in my career was qualifying for the nationals a few times and winning a regional competition as a 4. And then I had surgery, which is similar to a lot of the other guys with Duchenne, to have a spinal fusion to help straighten up my back. And after that, throwing was a very difficult thing and I couldn't do it anymore. But then there was probably about a year when I was very on and off with it. I watched a lot of Paddy's training, who obviously was going to Rio and knew he was going to Rio quite early on. So a lot of the time I would watch some of his training and sort of not really get too involved in it, just sit on the side and sort of see how he worked with his ramp assistant, what the balls were sort of like and what you needed to be competitive in that.
And this was when Paddy was obviously at Trelawn's.
Yeah, this is when he was at Trelawn's. It was the last couple of years that he was there. And yeah, I was amazed at the accuracy and didn't think I would really get anywhere near to that. Because obviously playing as a 4 regionally, a BC4, it's not, the accuracy is nowhere near what it is higher up. I mean, I'm glad I'm not a BC4 anymore because I'm just glad I never had to play Steph because I had almost no power about my game. I would have been in a lot of trouble playing anyone. I think I went to a DSE competition once and Kieran was on the in and around the program and was potentially going to Rio. And I think I lost to him 16-0 or something. And I think the thing that people need to understand is that it took a very long time for me to get competitive. It wasn't like as soon as I became a 3, I was suddenly good. There was a 3-year period where I was quite poor and I would struggle to get to the nationals.
So what age were you, Will, when you had the spinal fusion and you switched to?
So I was 15 at that point.
Yeah.
And I didn't really play when I was sort of 16 because there was a bit of, I was kind of in between the classifications still. I was still physically able to throw, but it was quite a painful thing. Yeah. That wasn't really something that could come into classification. So I kind of had to wait until I wasn't physically able enough almost to do that anymore. So I probably switched when I was 16 properly, after watching a lot of this other training. And obviously, initially I had a different ramp assistant. Rod was with me, who was somebody that worked at Trelawn's, and he helped me for 2 or 3 years. Connor was helping another player for a little bit as a BC1 assistant, and was always quite interested in the game, I think. Obviously, there are a few things that happened to get him in a position to be my assistant, because he was with Cameron, who was another BC3 at that time when I was 16, and he neither of us were particularly good because we both kind of transitioned to ramping at a very similar time, but he just got to Connor first, pretty much, and then his first nationals he got to the final, I think, and then went on to the British Championships. I think lost to Scott 18-0. So he didn't have a great run when he got up to that point, but I think that was quite a useful time for both of us because we were both learning it still, and both of us being a reasonable quality for lower level England. It was quite a good learning experience there, and it was sort of quite a natural thing. But I would say at that point the equipment was far worse than it is now. At that point we were both using a Beresford ramp, which I know some people still use. But in our case, I didn't have a head point or anything. I would have to have my arm lifted up onto the top of it. I didn't really have a great degree of control, and the ramp would move, and it wasn't a great situation to be in. And it took a couple of years before I got a ramp that I was comfortable with, that I felt could actually help me challenge. I think it's just important for everyone to understand that it took a long time for me to get in a position. I mean, I played Jess 3 times before I got a point offer. And then it took a little bit after that to sort of figure out how to be as accurate as other people. Because I think now the gap's a lot smaller and it's more decision making that is the difference between players rather than the equipment a lot of the time. But in the past, it wasn't like that.
So there's it's a great descriptor, and I think it's a really good lesson. And I know Steph was, I guess, a very similar position, certainly internationally. And Steph went, he can correct me if I'm wrong, but something like 5 years before he won a game internationally. It was something crazy like that. And then obviously you suddenly find what you can do, and you find a rhythm, and you find a way of playing, and things start to change. So I think for BC3s, from what you've said, there's a couple of things there's 3 things that stand out for me. One, you don't hit the ground winning competitions. You have to learn and work and learn and work and learn and work. And I think you're prepared to do that. And having somebody like Paddy around to watch was probably really useful. But the other 2 things are finding the right ramp. Now, obviously now you have a UK Boccia sort of carbon fibre ramp, and you've used a version of that for a couple of years. So you started off with the Beresford ramp, which is quite heavy. Then and it's an okay ramp. It's a good design. It's just quite heavy and clunky to use. So what was the ramp that you went to that made you feel more comfortable? What was the?
It was the victory ramp completely. Right. I mean, I took a bit of a risk on that. I think that's a thing that's been quite common throughout my career, is I've taken risks on things. Like with that ramp, it was sort of I was showing pictures of it, and Barry was saying this is the Korean coach who is Hyung's ramp assistant, who is not supposedly the best in the world, but he is the best in the world, even still without that assistant. And sort of we just took a risk on it, and it got here. And I mean, even then though, it wasn't instant. I went to my first nationals with that. I pretty much changed it. It was a couple of weeks before the nationals. It wasn't like it just kind of, we got it and it was like, we just got to use it. Like there's the other ramp I was using wasn't the same standard at all, and we could see how much better it was. And it was I was going all right with it, and then there was a game where I think I was playing Lewis Fisher, and I somehow dropped 5 points in the last end of that game, and lost the tiebreak that came after that. So that was a difficult thing to take, but it was sort of just, we knew, I think I was in a good place in that we finally found a bit of equipment that I needed, and we just needed to take time over that. So this was still before Connor was really involved in it. And I didn't really have a great understanding of the balls or anything like that. I kind of just had, at that point, I would have probably been still using balls that I had on as a thrower, with a few in from Chul, but the victory balls as well. It was sort of a mixed match of that. No hard balls or anything like that. That was still a bit too early for me to really know that there were even hard balls.
It's obviously fascinating because I think you're right. At the level that you're now playing, there are certain choices in equipment in terms of how hard the hard balls are, how many hard balls, which soft balls that you go with. You've stuck with the super soft victory balls as your soft balls, whereas other players in the squad are using the Handy Life super soft, which are quite difficult to get under control and quite time consuming. But I think the victory balls definitely work for you. So I think equipment is definitely a theme. I think in Boccia anyway, but I think particularly for BC3, and that combination. So the three things were: one, you don't hit the ground winning. You have to learn and improve and learn and improve. Second was you have to get some equipment that you're comfortable with, and that never stops. That's work in progress. No doubt when we emerge from Tokyo, we'll look at improving the ramp that we've got. We've all got to get new sets of balls anyway for 2022. So we'll look at that again, but it constantly evolves. But the third thing, if I can call him a thing, is Connor and the ramper system. So as a pairing, as a unit, you and Connor work incredibly well together. I know Connor's on the call. So, but again, a bit like other bits of your equipment, and I know Connor isn't a bit of equipment, he's far more than that. It obviously took a bit of time from, I guess, you knowing each other to building the kind of working relationship that you have now. So again, for those that are either BC3s on the call or want to really understand about the importance of the BC3 assistant, so that they're not a piece of equipment, but an actually invaluable part of the partnership. Just tell us a little bit about how that relationship with Connor evolved and what it is now, what it is that you think makes the two of you work so well together.
I mean, I think now it's sort of, we've been going through not like the last sort of 6 months with Andrew, the psychologist, and going through sort of what our personalities are. And with me and Connor, it kind of found that we kind of cover almost all the bases of that between us. And I think that is a good indicator of how well we work together. And I think just we've both had a lot of similar experiences, which I think really help over time. Because so it did take a little while for us to get used to each other. And I mean, I think it's important to say that we don't always agree on everything in the game, and we still argue about shots and things. I think that's important that you have those discussions about the shots. You are able to have those discussions with your assistant, because I mean, just at the camp a couple of weeks ago, there was a time where, because I trust Connor's judgment with the balls as well as I do mine, and there were a few where it was like, do I play further up the court? And we had a little discussion about that and came to a decision between us. And I think that's been, and I think Connor knows now how to get the best out of me almost, and when I need to calm down, when he wants to get me a bit up and going for it. Like, I mean, we've had all sorts of different experiences. We've had games where we've flown away and won loads of points really early on, just blowing other people away, and games where it's really tight and there is a lot of pressure and stress on both of us. And I think being able to cope with that as a unit is something that's really important. Just you're not going to win every game by lots of points, and there are going to be games that you have to win in ugly fashion. And I think the thing that Connor brings to it is a lot of the analytical side of things and rolling the balls, making sure they are as straight as possible. Because I think we can all point the ramp okay. It's just getting that level of consistency with the balls and almost with my mindset. And that's changed hugely as well throughout my career. Like early on, I was quite energetic, aggressive, and now I'm just trying to settle down a bit, be a bit more level-headed, and just almost try and treat every end the same. Like, obviously, it's not the same. If it's the final end of a world championship final, obviously it's easy to say we'll treat it exactly the same as any other end, but inside you're scared.
But it is it's very much a personality thing. So there are people out there. There are BC3s out there, and you'll know who we're talking about. Who it doesn't matter whether they're playing in the local hall against a friend or a family member, or whether they're playing the world number one. The intensity and the level is the same. And equally, there are people who feasibly need that extra level to get themselves up. And And I think it is personality. And I think, again, for people listening in, we never have a conversation, if possible, with players that doesn't also involve the assistant in BC3. It's definitely a unit. So if I'm saying, right, we've got a players meeting, that definitely involves all of the assistants as well. And the assistants are absolutely an integral part. And I think the relationship, again, it varies. So there are some assistants who will follow the lead of their player, and they will do, I guess, as what is required by the player, and it's very much a player-led process. There are some where it's very much a partnership of equals, and there's a lot of discussion and sometimes argument. And probably the most established pairing in the UK is Scott and Gary Mccowan. They've been playing for 12 or 13 years, and they never stop arguing. And Gary's always right, and Scott's always right, and they'll never agree. But they somehow work out what the best way is for them to play. And yet there are other relationships that are nowhere near that volatile, if you like, but they can work equally well. But I think the relationship is really, really important. And I think you're right from a personality perspective. And again, for people listening in, we've certainly done personality profiles on all of the players, all of the assistants, on me as the coach, and we work out how we fit together, and we work out where the strengths are and where the blind spots are and where we need to take care. And I think really spending time on that relationship matters. And I would say that's true of all Boccia assistants, even if they're not BC3 assistants, in that they really do have to understand the needs of the player. But I think with BC3, it's just multiplied and amplified because they are part of the playing staff. But I do think you and Connor work incredibly well together, and I think it's a great partnership. And I do quite like to see you arguing and then trying to work out who's right and who's wrong at the end of that argument, which is usually
normally right.
Well, no, it's usually me. So it's we'll come back to that. But again, spend the time investing in that relationship. I think, again, as a coach, I would say this is very much a people business. But as a player, it's quite easy to feel quite insular and think it's just about you and what you do on the court, but it isn't. It's far bigger and wider than that, and what you do on a court impacts on lots of other people. So definitely invest the time in the relationships. It's obviously been a strange time. You kind of we were getting the story of your development and how you came to be a BC3 and you started to be, I guess, make the nationals, if you like. You're not winning them yet at the point you got to in the story. So what were the kind of turning points for you that kind of went from, I guess, trying to get out of the regionals and be there and not lose 16-0 to somebody, and actually feeling that you're actually a contender? What were the
mine was, I would say mine was quite quick in comparison to others. It was almost like a switch had been flipped almost. So I went to that. I'm gonna struggle to get my years right here. So the nationals I went to that I didn't do so well in. A few weeks after that, it kind of basically ended up coming with me to a competition in the Czech Republic, which was sort of one of the first times that it was the first time I'd ever been away for Boccia. And I went there, and it was through England, and obviously it's not a full BizFed competition or anything. It was a self-funded, friendly competition that went on. And yeah, we just kind of went there, and just internationally, like, people didn't seem as tough as they seemed nationally. I think that's just a reflection of the quality that is in a lot of levels of national play over here. I got to the final of that. In the semi-final, I played and beat Adam Peska, who is currently number 6, number 7 in the world. I want to say
8.
And 8, and he's a good player. And then I played Camille in the final, who was a Paralympian and went in 2016 to Rio, and he just sort of took me apart, and just the game was quite easy for him. I still think we got a couple of points, but he kind of kept me at arm's length, and that was sort of the first time I realised, right, I'm kind of okay at this, but there just needs to be more experience happening to sort of understand more of the game. Because I would have still only been 17, I think, at that point. So it was still sort of my first experience. It was my first experience of international boccia, and like I said, I was surprised that the standard wasn't a lot higher than it was. Like, it was a difficult competition for me, and we we will almost never make a mistake. But I do remember there was a violation in that, which was mainly my fault. We'll say, I'm going to say mainly. I'm not going to take all the blame for it. There was a stray wheel on the line. But yeah, that same year, then I was sorting out going to uni and stuff, so it was quite a difficult time. And I looked, when I went to uni, I went for a place that I thought would help me with the boccia. That was something I really wanted to do, but again, this is another showing of a risk-taking thing. So I was still not particularly good at that point. Like, I had a few people saying you could be good if you put the time in towards it, and it was sort of when I was looking around the unis, that was very much something that I wanted to learn from. It was, will this place let me be on a court and use a court? And I ended up at Solent Uni, which is interestingly become a little sort of hub for boccia a little bit. There's a few players down there. James Clowes is one of them. I was one of them, and a couple of others. And that was a big thing for me, and I wanted to go to a uni where that would be the case. But before I went, September of that year, there was a competition in Russia, a friendly competition, which was the first event I would have won. But there was quite a lot of pressure in that competition, because I went there and I was warming up and calibrating and stuff. And Alexander Legostav, who is, I'm not sure where he is in the ranking, but he's a very good player and a European Championship finalist from last year, from 2019. So he can clearly play. And he just said he wanted to play me in a game. And I was like, I knew who he was at that point, and I'd been told that he's very good, but he wasn't meant to be playing at this competition because it was an under 23s competition. So he just said he wanted to play me. So I ended up playing a match against him. It was quite a tactical match, and I lost 4-3 to him. And it was very close. And then the competition after that, it started off quite shakily for me. I think I lost to Matt Berry in the first game of the competition, and then just swept aside everyone after that. It was weird. It had flipped me into playing, because there was a lot of pressure on at that point, because I was out. If I lost any of the next few games, I was out. And I had to play Maxim, who's also a world ranked player. And we started off that game tight. It was 1-1. And then in the next two ends, I scored 10 points, I think. And was suddenly, like, I'd never played like that before. And it was really strange. And suddenly I was out in an unassailable lead. And after that, I won the whole competition. And it was, it's strange for me because it was so quick. And I don't think it's really happened where it was just sort of, now I understood the game so much better. It was just all the experiences in the past and the problems in the past had kind of all gone suddenly. Like, there wasn't an excuse for me to not be good anymore. There wasn't, oh, the ramp's a bit bad, the balls are a bit bad. It was sort of right, I've got the equipment now, what can I do with it? And then I moved to uni pretty much the week after I got back from Russia. And then some Russian maths ended up that we won the the gold in the pairs as well, which was definitely not right. Me and Connor did a lot of looking at it, and we were like, they've got that wrong. A Russian team should have won the whole thing, but we didn't mind. They messed it up, and we got the 2 gold medals for that. Then I moved to uni, and Connor at this point was had left Trelaws, and we'd spoken a long time before he left, and we organised that he would be one of my carers at uni. So it was him and 3 other people that all started that were completely new to care, and that was a strange sort of month before I went to the Scottish Open competition, which was where probably the first time Glynn would have taken notice of me was at that competition. Me and Paddy were drawn in the same group, and we played each other in the last game. Up until that, we both took apart the people that we were playing. The games weren't particularly close, and then we played each other in the last group game, basically to who was going to get through. I think it was 3 group winners and then a points runner up or something. So it was very much, if I lost the game, that was it. The competition was done for me. I think at that point, before we went to play that game, I didn't really mind what happened, because obviously uni had kind of taken up a big part of everything, and that was what a lot of my mind was focused on. Obviously, I tried to take myself out of that and think this is just the Boccia competition that we're at. And yeah, so I won that game 5-3, I think, and I'd taken quite an early lead of 3 points, where there was a bit where I hit the white back into space and left my ball with it, and that was a strange game. And I was surprised I won, because obviously at that point I'd watched Paddy play a lot, and I was thinking, hang on a minute, 18 months ago I was sat watching him train, thinking, how is he this accurate? And suddenly I've won the game, and that was quite a weird sort of feeling to be in that position. After that, I won the semi-final against C 8-0, and then played Jess in the final after she'd beaten Jamie, which I don't think anyone was expecting. But I mean, Jamie got the better of that, considering he went and won the Europeans that same year. I think it was only a couple of weeks after that he went and won the whole thing in Seville. So that was quite interesting. And then I played Jess in the final. And before this, I lost 16-0, 12-0, and then 12-1. So the last time I played her, I literally just nicked a point off her, and it was quite lucky. Very lucky, actually. She put it up the other end of the court, and somehow I snuck something in. And then, yeah, so I played her in the final, and I played really well, and it was 3-3 in the last end, and I think I had 4 balls left at the end to win, and it took a fair few of them, I seem to remember, and there was a ball to the side that Jamie and Scott came and spoke to me after the game and said, why didn't you just hit that? And I think my internet's just gone. Am I here? I here?
You're back. No, you're back. You were just about to tell us how you got 4 balls left to.
I ended up with one left, and it was quite an open target for me. And there was a ball to the side that Jamie and Scott after the game said, why didn't you just hit that? Why didn't you just hit that? I was sort of so tunnel vision on trying to lay up to it, lay up down the side, which now is actually one of my most hated shots. And I would never have tried that with the first one. I would always take the hitting shot over that. But eventually I got it and won the competition. And that was strange. I sort of thought I was going to be playing Jamie, and then suddenly I turned around and saw, hang on a minute, Jess has just won that game. And I think it was almost meant to be that it would be me playing her in the final, because we played those few games before that.
And then you've got Jamie and Paddy, who are our most medalled BC3 players that we've ever had, on a global scale, if you like, sort of being knocked out by yourself and Jess. So that's which is great for me when I'm watching. I've got to say, in international competitions are slightly different, but in domestic competitions, I definitely want to see the top players taken on and challenged and beaten. because they'll respond to that and learn from it. And as you said, Jamie then went on and won the European title a few weeks later. I mean, I think as we went through that, and probably it was not long after that you were invited then to one of the talent days that we had, I think, at Lilleshall. Is that right?
Yeah, there was one that it was a transition camp because Rich was there, and I sort of just got. I think it was a little bit after that because I don't think it was until the following year at the British Championships that I really got the call to go up there, and sort of I went away from that competition thinking, oh, I'm gonna get a call from Glynn soon. They're gonna want me playing at some point, and it sort of didn't come. And at that point, obviously my mind was kind of more focused on uni, and nothing really happened with it until I qualified for the nationals quite early on. I think I won one of the first regional events and qualified for it, and didn't really go again after that because it was because I was just focusing on the uni stuff, and went to nationals, won my first title. I think I beat Jess in that final 7-1, and that was one of the best games I think I played up to that point. And then it was so I qualified for the British Championships. There's one game there that really stands out to me. I played Scott in the group, and he was 3-0 up going into the last end, and I think I got 5 off him in the last end. And after that, I got through to the final. After there was a few weird things I wanted to pull out for a medical issue, the semi-final. So I played a player who I should be beating in a lot of games. Like it was a good game, it was close, and I started off quite nervy because I knew I would, if I won, I was in the British final. Playing, I didn't care who it ended up being Jamie, and yeah, that game wasn't so good. I think I lost 5 to him in the first end. Came away from the end trying to tell myself it was all okay by saying, "Oh, we should have got 6." I fought back okay. I lost 7-3 in that final, and that was Jamie's first British Championships, I think. Because Scott really likes the British Championships. He always seems to pull an extra little performance out of the bag and always beat his brother. But
I mean, the British Championships and those kind of events are always interesting. I mean, I think in the last decade, Jacob won 4. I think Scott has now won 4 as well. Jamie and Paddy have won 1 each. And again, but Jamie and Paddy are the most medalled players out in the wider world. I mean, obviously Jacob won plenty of medals in his time as well, including at World Championships and Europeans. But I think it's one of those things where the British Championships, almost what you said about 45 minutes ago, how amongst the BC3 group you can all beat each other, and even then, where you were on your journey towards wherever you're heading next, you were still quite young in that journey, if you like. But you'd already beaten Paddy, you'd beaten Jess, who was part of the world-class programme. You took on Scott, you played a final against JB. You were already sort of getting in amongst those kind of players. Although it is a different thing, obviously, doing it domestically to doing it internationally. But I think that need to play to that standard. And I think the other thing, again, in that sort of story that you told of that journey from being a sort of making nationals to being like a British finalist, that relatively short period of time, I think the 2 international trips were obviously really, really valuable to get you away from playing Paddy and Jamie and Scott in particular, but to play other people. And Kamil Vasicek was a good player. Adam Peska is a good player. Sergei Legostav, I think, is ranked 7 at the moment. These are 3 top 10 players that you get the opportunity from being part of an England squad to go and have a go at. And I think there's a real value to those sort of smaller trips. And I kind of think going way back to somebody like Jacob Thomas, he would start off at things like the Czech Open or that kind of event, or Riverlanders used to be an event in the Netherlands. So smaller kind of competitions, just learning the trade and playing different people. So I think when people are offered those opportunities or they're there on the table, I think to take them, at some point they become less valuable. You going to the Czech Open now, well, right now it'd probably be great because we haven't competed properly for so long. But in a normal non-COVID world, there's probably slightly less value because there are other competitions now to go to that have greater depth to them. But I think when you're learning your trade, the ability to get out and play these different types of people, and then kind of, oh, hold on a minute, they're top 10 in the world, and I've just won 3 of the ends, or they're top 10 in the world and I've won, or I've lost 4-3, or whatever it is. I think they're really, really important. Steph asked a question, which I'll go to now because it's there, he's asked. Obviously, the accuracy of the game is incredibly. It's incredibly tight and it's incredibly precise in his classification, and potentially even more so in BC3. And games can be won and lost by very, very small margins. So on this journey that you've described, I always think you learn more in the games you lose than the games you win, although not everybody has that perspective. But what's a big standout lesson in these kind of events? Forget the trading for a minute, but think about going to Prague or going to Russia or going to the Scottish Open or going to the British Championships. What's a big lesson you learn on this journey that you're on?
I would say the biggest thing that I've learned is probably to be resilient and keep coming back even when things aren't going as well. Because as I said before, there are a lot of games where I kept going back to competitions and I was still losing games by large margins, and sort of just being able to come back from that. I think that sort of it's a difficult thing to kind of describe because it is different for everyone and everyone has different experiences. But for me, it was being able to come back at people and just have those experiences and try and learn from all of them. Like you say, I agree in that every game that you lose, you do learn more from that. And I think for me, for a couple of us in the squad more than others, I think games that we lose really eat at us and really make us want to go again. Every time something you think's unfair, you think that's unfair has happened, or you think I really should have won that game, but I made mistakes. I think that's what makes me want to keep going back to them, keep going back
I think for everybody here, Will is one of the people that will be the first to ask me, when are those matches being downloaded? When can I get access to them? And I think Will is definitely somebody who wants to look back at matches and see what he can learn from them. And I think that's really important, that you don't ever take a defeat at face value. You take a defeat as an opportunity to learn. And I think, again, in my own career, Lauren has just asked a question about what's the best or most important piece of advice that you've been given, and that could be from family, it could be from a coach, it could be from an assistant. But I'll give you a minute to think about that. But the kind of the win or you learn type approach was something that I was told many, many, many years ago, and that you don't just leave a loss feeling disappointed. You use that as a springboard to do things better. And I think
I think I would carry that with just, it's okay to be disappointed and annoyed that you have lost that match, because I think the second that you almost don't feel like that, then you maybe shouldn't be too involved in it, just because it is sport is an emotional thing. It doesn't matter which sport it is. It's always an emotional thing, and I don't think you should try and hide away from that fact. And obviously, I know that's not what you're saying, but I just think
no, but I do think that matters, and I think for anybody that's aspirational, while it's okay and it's kind of light to say, look, we will learn from the defeats, and we will in the fullness of time, but it does feel like you've been kicked in the gut a few times when you come off the court, or whatever it is that you're involved in, when you know it hasn't gone well, or the result hasn't gone your way, and there are still not so much for me as an athlete, but for me as a coach, and there are still some defeats that hurt. Years and years later, I can think back to one 6 years ago that we lost when we were at the Europeans, when we hosted them in Surrey, and we lost to Belgium, and from an almost impossible position to lose from, we managed to conspire to lose, and it still hurts me right now. We definitely used it as a springboard to change and go on and qualify. So that bit about we learned from it was definitely true, but I still feel that defeat 6 years later. And things that we then had to go and do to finalise qualification for Rio. So I think you're right. You have to be disappointed. You have to feel that it matters. It really matters. So I think that's a really good answer. But if we go back to the Lauren's question on advice, is there anything? Is there any kind of nugget that kind of has stuck with you?
I would say one of the big ones was after the British Championships in Northern Ireland. On our journey back, me and Conrad had a chat about it, because I went out in the semi-finals of that, then lost the third, fourth playoff. And coming away from that competition, I felt like I could have done more. And I still felt like I had some energy left, and from a discussion we had, was basically, we don't want that ever again, really. Yeah. Like, you've got to leave everything you've got on the court.
Was that the one that Paddy won?
No, that was Scott won that one. Scott won that one. I lost the semi-final, then lost to Jamie in a game where he played in a weird position on the court, and it really got into my head, and it really I wasn't having a good time on that game. It was right next to the final court, and it was sort of like I got too ahead of myself. And I think that's another thing I'd say is, don't get ahead of yourself in competitions, because I think that's happened 2 times probably in my whole career, and it's gone wrong both times. Because I beat Scott in the group stage at that British Championships, and thought, right, here we go. Competition's opened up now. I've avoided Jamie in the semi-finals, and then you just take your eyes off the game that's gone on ahead of you, and suddenly you're a few points down, and you're not in a position to get that back. And you're having to really chase after it, which is never a position you want to be in. It happens, but it's something that you never want to experience. And I'd say that was a big conversation we had, and I think that sort of changed as things went on. And yeah, the other time it happened would have been the Zagreb Regional Open after I beat Scott in the semi-final. I think as a whole squad, we probably put too much on that match. As our little group, we put too much on that match. Like, there was too much of, we're the best 2 people here, this should be the final, which I think it should have been, because I think we were the 2 best players there. But maybe we should have thought that a bit. We should have had that in the back of our mind, rather than, right, I've just beaten Scott now, this final against some Swedish girl is going to be easy, which it's never as easy as you think it's going to be.
Yeah, and I do think it's a lesson learned, certainly by all of the group that I coach, and I guess you were kind of relatively new into it at that point. But it's kind of that idea that we don't get ahead of ourselves. And I think you're right. The semi-final against Scott was a massive match, but it was a semi-final. Once you've overcome that, the big game is the one that follows. And
really difficult to do that in the heat of the moment. Yeah. It's really difficult.
And I think sometimes the bronze medal matches are hard when you've come off a loss, and you've got to pick yourself up and play for a bronze when you think you should be playing for gold, and equally when you played the most difficult match in the semi-final, and then you kind of think the final should be a bit of a breeze by comparison. And Maria, who beat you, I mean, you're right, you're better than Maria, you should beat Maria, but she's a top 20 player, and she's been around and in the top 20 for a few years. She played you right in the V, from what I remember. Did she? Very, right.
Yeah, I definitely remember that.
Yeah.
David wouldn't shut up about that for months after, and I think he kept threatening to play me there because he knew that I struggled on that. But it's really difficult because I warmed up really well for that game. I played in the V, never missed a shot, and then suddenly my first layup at the thing that's right on top of you, I dropped short, and suddenly you're wasting loads of balls to try and get up close to it, and then she plays something up the side and that you weren't ready for, and it gets kind of. I mean, I must add that there was probably one of the best shots I've ever seen on a boccia court in that game when I lumped it up her end of the court. Her last ball was she had 2 rocks left at the end. There was a ball right over to the side. I still don't think she meant it, but I'm always going to think that. She fired one at it and turned away, went off the court. I was holding 4 at this point, and I had a soft ball left, a soft medium ball left. I thought, here we go. I'm going to go into the final end with a couple of points lead. Her last ball, she got her mind, I think, to kick the ramp a little bit to the left, and then she just released this ball from nowhere, and it was going. And there was a ball to the side that it could have gone in off. I thought, no, it's fine. There's no chance. Now she's missed that one. There's no chance this one will go. And then it just came off this other ball and just sat right in front of me. And that was difficult to take because I didn't think that there was any chance of that happening. I think it's important to know you've always got to stay alert for what can happen and what.
And I think, again, other people won't know what we're talking about, so this becomes a bit of a private conversation, which is fine. But you also then, when you go into the final end, you definitely had shots to claw back the lead that she'd got. But I think that the resilience, if you like, that you spoke about earlier as a quality, that still being in it, I think if you play that in now, if you just get to that 4th end and it plays out the same, you get the points now in a way that you didn't get them a couple of years ago. So I think that resilience, that ability to overcome that sort of shock of that ball dropping in off and sitting in front and not really giving you a shot at the end of the 3rd end, you probably carried a little bit. And when she kept missing in the final end and it just opened up for you, I think now you saw the points, and I think that's part of your development. I'm slightly conscious of time, and I want to ask you another question, because you mentioned David taking the mick, and obviously David's, I wouldn't call him, I will call him an outlier in our group. He's an outlier in the world, but he's also an outlier in our group because we're all sort of BC3s and him as a BC1. But I think over the years, you definitely have played with people from other classifications. We spoke, like next week, we're up on a camp in Scotland, and your first game is against Steph. You played David quite a lot during lockdown. Again, for those that don't know, because we're on a world-class program, we were able to continue training through a lot of lockdown when other people weren't, but only in high-performance centres. So David was training at Sophia Gardens in Cardiff, and Will was able to come up. And then at some point when it was safe to do so, they could overlap. So you played a lot of matches against David, and I know previously you played with Louis quite a lot, so as a BC4 player. So what are the kind of, either in terms of your development or in terms of the quality that you have to bring, what are the advantages and disadvantages of playing across the classifications, of turning up and having to play Steph in Scotland next week, of playing David in Cardiff, of playing Louis down at Amaroon? What are the advantages for you of those kind of games?
I think realistically, any high quality match is important. It doesn't matter what classification you're playing. I think some shots are a bit different in the context of those matches. Like if I'm playing Louis or Steph, if I nail my first ball, I know full well that doesn't mean anything. Chances are my ball's getting sent to the other end of the court, and they're gonna play a great shot after that. And I think it is good in that it makes you think differently and play different shots. So with David, quite often he'll open things up, and then we would never do it, but he'll just put a ball to the side of it or just tuck one in behind it, which is something we wouldn't do as BC3s, because being in control and putting your ball in the middle of the white in the most difficult spot possible for them to move is the most important thing to do. And we would never play that sort of shot. But I think it's quite interesting, the different style, the different styles of play and how to manage those games.
Yeah, I agree. I think game management is really important, and sometimes in those games you're trying things out, and sometimes in those games you're really trying to win, and sometimes it's a combination of both. But with the throwers, they can bring a dimension of going over the top, if you like, and lobbing that you wouldn't get it from a BC3 player. But I think game management and working out how to make the best of what you've got and your equipment really matters. And I do think those games are really valuable. Beth has just put a question in, and it's also one that I've been asked to ask you. Now, you've only played one international tournament. You're new to the world of international boccia, but so the question I've been asked to ask you is, what is your most memorable match that you've played in? And Beth has slightly twisted that and said, if you could replay a match where you knew you could have won but didn't, which match would it be? So memorable match, or match that actually, if you could play with hindsight, you'd have won it, which is the match that you choose to replay?
Memorable match, I would say, would be that game with Scott. Partly because his whole family were there. Jamie was there watching it, and he'd sort of gone along nicely and was 3 points up, and I got the 5 in the last end, which was a surprise to me. I wouldn't have played the last shot if I'd known one was already scoring, but I couldn't see it, so I just played another one and it was fine. One that I would replay would be the British Championship final with Jamie, the first one. Just because I think it would have put me in a strong position. I think I could have pushed on for the world class program quicker if I'd drawn in that game and won a big final. And also, the British Championship seemed to be a bit of a bogey competition for me, which, I mean, I'd rather it was a bogey competition. I do well at a World Championship or European Championship, but yeah, that match definitely,
I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because and because we will have players and coaches on who might be aspirational to come to world class program, winning a British title may or may not have accelerated you forward. Yeah. Because the reality is we have funding for a finite number of places, and unless either a place becomes available because somebody falls off or retires, or we find some extra money from somewhere, sometimes places aren't there. And I know that can make it sometimes feel like a bit of a closed shop, which is, I think, why the sort of transitions program, or that, and I think it's worked particularly well with BC3 for you and for Beth, and for probably Rich Amos for a while before that as well, in that you're able to get some coach contact time, some input, some invitations to camps, but without being part of the world-class program. So you still have a foot in the England door, if you like, but you're getting a lot of the inputs and the advice and the training from the world-class program, but without actually being a fully integrated part of it. And I think that kind of transitional period, which lasted 18 months, 2 years, or whatever it was for you, is actually really useful. And it's probably worth saying that winning a British title doesn't necessarily get you on a world-class program. It might have felt like it would have done at the time.
Yeah, that's more what I meant.
Yeah,
at the time it felt like it would.
You'd have just been even more disappointed that you still didn't get a call. That's what would have happened. Okay. I'm going to finish, unless any other questions come up, on a future-based question, which is also where I started with ambitions. So there's a lot of rule changes coming in. We're going to be playing under completely different circumstances in all the competitions after Tokyo, in terms of a male-female split, in terms of mixed doubles, in terms of ball licensing in 2022. And I think some of these things are problematic, and for the most part, a lot of the changes that have happened in the sport have been, in the end, good for the sport. So how do you manage those kind of things when a directive comes out and says, right, you've got to change all your balls for 2022, and it's mixed doubles now with no subs? Or, how do you respond to those kind of changes? What's the kind of mindset as you go forward? Because to a degree, we're moving into your time now, if you like. Your time, we hope, is the next few years. So how do you respond and react to these kind of changes that crop up?
I think it's, from my point of view, some of them are quite frustrating with where they came in, and I think they did sort of help. It was one of those factors that helped slow down my progression into the program, such as the female rule initially. And now with the split, obviously, I think that's a good change, because it means that the places that might have gone to the male players now are just the same, and it's not as. But I think it's okay to be a bit frustrated with them initially, because I'm aware that rule came in. I seem to remember while some of you were in an airport, that original female rule came in. And I think just that it's difficult, because there's not a lot you can do about it. Like, that's just the way the rules are. If that's how BC want them to be, that's how they want them to be. Like, there's nothing we can do. Like even with, unfortunately, with the ball licensing one, a lot of people's fears were ignored with that. I can see why that rule was brought in, and I do think it will be. I think it was going to be painful whenever it was brought in. It's going to be a big change for a lot of people, but I think long term it will be good, in that it stops. It attempts to stop a lot of people messing around with balls. Obviously, there's still a fair amount that I think will go on, but it's not like we're in a position where, with Greg, his balls were at a point impossible to move. And it kind of, I think it will stop that happening, although that did stop pretty quickly after the ball cheats out banners started appearing. That did stop pretty quickly. But I think, like I said, there's just not a lot you can do about it. So I don't think there's a lot of point losing sleep over it too much.
No, and I think you go back to, again, one of those cliches in sport, in that you control the controllables. And if that bit is out of your control, you just have to react to it and manage it as best you can. And if there's something you can do about it, fine. If there's not, then you roll with it. And I think it's, again, I would probably say to everybody else that you're one of the first people in the whole of the GB squad, and certainly in the group that I coach, to set about, I guess, positively reacting to ball licensing. So you've already got all your victory or a number of victory balls with the license on that you can start to integrate. And we would know that, I think certainly on the blue side, there are a couple of balls that you'd have wanted to have changed anyway.
All of them.
Okay, all of them. And similarly, you've got some dream balls which are on the way, and will be here in the next month or so. So I think it's one of those where you just have to respond to it positively, and even if you don't like it, you have to respond positively. And I think you've done that, and I think it will stand you in good stead. I'm quite comfortable, Will, that you've shared quite a lot with us tonight. So I'm just going to open it up. If anybody wants to come off mic and ask any questions or put anything else into the chat function, but I think we've all learned a little bit more about you and a little bit more about your journey. But I think as a coach in this relationship, you're still really right at the beginning. And I've said it to you before, I have absolutely no doubts that you're going to be winning global medals. And I think to come from a place where you're losing 16-0 to Jess and trying to qualify for nationals, and you're going off to Eastern Europe to get some experience playing people that you don't know very well, to getting onto a world-class program and to be mixing it with some of the best players in the world, and you're still at the start. You played one tournament. I think I think you're going places, and I think it's a journey that's open to anybody. But you've got to have the same kind of smarts and the same kind of determination, and not to worry when you lose 16-0 if you know something better is coming. And I think the knowing something better is coming really matters. So I'll shut up, and just if there's no more questions, I'll hand back to you, Natalie.
Yeah, thank you both. Thanks, Will. That was fascinating to listen to. I'm sure everyone else agrees. And thanks, Glynn, for taking us through tonight. Good luck to you, really, Will. We look forward to seeing the rest of your journey. We'll pop this up on YouTube as well, so people can watch back. There's a couple of thank you messages coming into the chat as well, if you have a little look over them. But yeah, as Glynn says, if there's no more questions, we'll call it a night, and thank you both again.
Okay, thanks, and thanks everybody for staying with us for the last 75 minutes or so.
Cheers, everyone. Have a good evening.
Goodbye, all.
Cheers. Thanks.
Good job, Will. Well done.
Thank you.
You're natural, Will.
No, I'm really not. I really don't enjoy the whole chatting about it. I'd rather be doing something.
No, I mean, that didn't come across at all. It was fascinating. I didn't even realise what time it was. I could have just listened. How much detail you've got for all the matches going back years. It's really it's fascinating.
It is interesting, isn't it, that it's inherent, but I think the good players, and I think BC3s are quite process orientated, and they just remember everything. They remember every shot of every game, and I think it's a skill, but it's also it shows that it matters, and that learning. I remember when that ball did this, and it was 4 years ago, and it went offline, and the ramp was kicked, and it came off that ball, and it's ingrained in the memory. And I think, again, the good players will retain all that and learn from those kind of things.
Yeah, it really brings your story to life when you're talking about it. This competition, this year, this shot, and you can, it's good. It's good to hear.
It was nice to hear you open up, Will, because you are a man of few words, and I think it was it was nice for people to listen to you describe, I guess, some of the challenges that you face and overcome. Are you there, Connor? Still, in fact, I can see that you are there. Do you want to come off mic for a minute? Maybe he's cleared off. Well, maybe.
He's listening to me.
He's gone to watch the football, isn't he?
Yeah, he's listening to me too much.
Yeah, he'll be watching the football and just pretending to be here. No. Okay, good job. Thanks very much, Will, and thanks, Nat, for facilitating.
No, thanks both for agreeing to be here. Good luck with everything, everybody. Hopefully, speak to you all soon, no doubt, when you've got a spare 5 minutes.
Cheers.
Cheers.
See you soon.
Thank you.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.